Hi readers, today we're going to talk about one of the best books that I have ever read, which is Dom Casmurro by the Brazilian writer Machado de Assis. Dom Casmurro was first published in 1899 and it is considered to be a masterpiece of Brazilian literature. Dom Casmurro is a realist novel. It is written as a memoir by an elderly man who is looking back on his youth and his marriage. I own this edition from Portugal, which is published by Guerra y Paz, but Dom Casmurro is available also in English translation. You will find links to different editions in both English and Portuguese in the show notes for this video. Just expand the description and you will find them. By the way, if you buy any books using my links, you will be supporting my channel because I will receive a small commission from any sales. Before I go into the novel, I feel like I need to talk about the title because one of the keys to both understanding this novel and enjoying it is understanding the title, because as we will see later, Dom Casmurro is open to different interpretations, and the title is key. So Dom Casmurro is a nickname for the protagonist / narrator of this novel, whose name is Bento Santiago. And even though the novel opens with an explanation of the title, I don't think that that is enough. Not because the explanation provided in the text is inaccurate, but because it is incomplete. So the word Casmurro, that's the key word in the title, has different meanings in Portuguese. I would translate it into English as stubborn, obstinate, headstrong, self-absorbed, and sullen. So Machado de Assis is telling us from the title how we should read this novel, or at least how to deal with its narrator / protagonist. Because what we are going to get here is a very selective account of the life of a character who is stubborn and self-absorbed. Now, if you knew a person who fit those characteristics in real life, would you trust everything they told you? Probably not. So here we're dealing with what critics call an unreliable narrator. And I think readers need to bear that in mind as they read this novel. Now let me do a little summary of the novel's plot. My summary will contain spoilers, so if you have not read Dom Casmurro yet or don't want any spoilers, you can skip ahead. You will find timestamps in the show notes for this video, so you can move to the next section right away if you'd prefer. Bento Santiago is a 54-year-old lawyer from Rio de Janeiro. 54 may not seem like such an advanced age to us now, but in the 19th century, it was. So Bento Santiago is well established and a bit of a loner. He decides to look back on his life to reckon with his past and to also show us why he got to be alone. This novel is not a full account of his life, but rather it focuses on his teenage years and the early years of his marriage. This novel explains how Bento Santiago became Dom Casmurro. The novel begins, as I said earlier, with an explanation of where the nickname came from and how people started using it because of Bento Santiago's reclusiveness. Then he takes us back to his childhood. Raised by a widowed mother, Bento Santiago is destined to attend a seminar and become a priest. However, he is in love with his neighbor Capitulina, better known as Capitu. So little Bento, or Bentinho, goes to the seminar, but he will never become a priest. At the seminar, however, he meets another boy who becomes his best friend, Ezequiel Escobar. After their time in the seminar, Bento marries Capitu, and Escobar marries one of Capitu's friends, a girl named Sancha. Now, Sancha and Ezequiel have a daughter who they name Capitulina. Capitu and Bento have a son who they name Ezequiel. So you can see how close both couples were, that they named their children after a member of the other couple. Years later, Escobar dies in a swimming accident, and at his funeral, Bento begins to suspect that his wife had an affair with his best friend because of the way she acts. Just to add to his suspicions, Escobar notices how his son Ezequiel begins to act a lot like his late friend. As it happens, the boy is good at mimicking people, not just Escobar, but Bento becomes convinced that his wife Capitu cheated with Escobar and that Ezequiel is not his son. So what does Bento do? He rejects his wife and child and sends them off to Europe. He does go to Europe later several times over the years, but never goes to see them. Eventually, Capitu dies in Europe, and as an adult, Ezekiel visits his father Bento in Rio. But Bento is still convinced, stubborn as he is, that Ezekiel is not his son. Dom Casmurro is a psychological novel, but a lot of people also read it like a kind of detective novel. They try to find clues in the text that would indicate whether Capitu actually cheated on her husband and who the real father of Ezekiel is. Now, this novel has been read differently also throughout time. I think early on readers were more inclined to believe Bento because he was the authoritative voice that narrates the novel, and probably because he was a man. And readers also tend to empathize with first-person narrators. But there are also feminist readings of this novel that redeem Capitu. I think that how you respond to this novel will say a lot more about you as a reader and as a person than about Bento or Capitu. And I would say that that's the key that has turned this book into a classic that everyone, in my opinion, should read. The question of paternity will never be settled. It cannot be settled, but there will always be readers convinced that they have the right answer to this question. And I would love to hear what you think about this, because there are all kinds of clues in the text that would indicate that Capitu, in fact, cheated on her husband. But I think it is important to remember that we're just hearing from one perspective here, okay? We're hearing from the husband, who is convinced that he was cheated on. But we never hear from Capitu in this novel. We just don't know her side of the story at all. And I would even go as far as to say that Capitu is not much of a character in this novel, because all we know about Capitu is what Bento tells us. And he doesn't really tell us much about her. Also, remember that at the point of writing his memoirs, Bento has not seen or spoken to Capitu for decades. So Bento is writing purely from memory, and even he admits that he cannot be too precise about some of details sometimes. The possibility or his conviction that Capitu cheated on him is something that Bento has clearly thought about and probably obsessed about over many years. And everyone who keeps remembering the past always adds stuff to that, stuff that didn't happen. So the real question to me is, how much are we prepared to trust and believe Bento? Mind you, I'm not saying that he's a liar. I don't think Bento lies in the sense that he's purposefully telling us something that he does not believe to be true. He is convinced that Capitu had an affair with his best friend and that her son is a result of that affair. And even though he only reveals that almost at the end of the novel, his whole narration is colored by that belief, by that conviction. So even when he describes Capitu as a young girl, when he's talking about his childhood, he's looking back on her from the perspective of someone convinced that that little girl is going to cheat on him. So his description of young Capitu is not that of a young boy in love, but that of a jealous and suspicious older man. Dom Casmurro is told in extremely short chapters. It is not a long novel at all, but it has 148 chapters. This means that some of the chapters are just one paragraph long, and many of them are not much longer than 1 or 2 pages. Now, that, coupled with a colloquial tone and how the narrator addresses the reader directly, makes this novel hugely enjoyable to read. At least to me. There are little digressions here and there. For example, the narrator will announce that he will talk about X in the next chapter, but ends up talking about Y instead. Other times he just forgets what he was going to talk about. And all of that, to me, adds up to the sense that you shouldn't really take everything he tells you at face value. Something that I noticed and I thought was very curious about this novel, but then I'm not sure if it comes through in the English translation, is that the narrator often addresses his reader as female. So he uses the word leitora, which is a feminine noun instead of the masculine leitor. That is the word that we would use for a male reader or for a reader whose gender identity we don't know. So I thought that was interesting. Dom Casmurro is full of irony and references to classic literature, mostly to Othello by Shakespeare. Dom Casmurro is a novel that seems easy to read and straightforward, but it isn't really. Unlike other 19th century novels about adultery like Anna Karenina by Tolstoy or Madame Bovary by Flaubert, where the reader knows and is privy to the adultery and knows exactly what happened and why it happened, here in Dom Casmurro what we have is the suspicion of adultery. But because the novel is told as a first-person narrative, the reader is always inclined to empathize with the narrator/protagonist, which is why so many people are convinced that Capitu indeed cheated on her husband, just like Emma or Anna did on her respective spouses. If you have read 19th century realist novels from Europe and have not read anything by Machado de Assis, you are missing out on something you are going to love. And if Dom Casmurro was your first foray into his writing and you would like me to discuss more novels by Machado de Assis, I have good news for you, because I am planning on reading more novels by this author and discussing them in the next few months. So stay tuned, because you will like what's coming up. In the meantime, please let me know what you thought of this novel, and I will see you again in my next video. Bye.